Friends, as I dreamed and planned for this mini series on identity formation, I knew there was one friend who absolutely had to be a part of it. My guest today is a woman of deep faith and profound wisdom. Her extraordinary character has been formed by hardship, not in spite of it. I'm inspired and challenged by who she is today and who she is still becoming. And I think you will be too. You do not want to miss listening to this goodness and grit and as I sit down with the amazing author and speaker Lysa TerKeurst. Now, if there are a few of you listeners that don't know all about her, which I mean probably 3, 2, 1. Lysa TerKeurst is all the things. She is president and chief visionary officer of Proverbs 31 Ministries. She is the author of 7 New York Times best-selling books. She's a boss. She has kids, like 5, right, Lysa? 5, and how many grandkids so far?
Well, we had 3, and then this year we've had 5 be born. So now we have a total of 8.
What? Oh my gosh. So 8 grandkids from 3 to 8. That is absolutely amazing. And she is married to her husband, Chad, which I'm sure we'll get into momentarily. But she is a deep, deep, way beyond inspiration to me. Just a woman I want to be like when I grow up. So,
Well,
Lysa, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
thank you, Catherine. It's always a joy when I get to spend some time with you. So thank you
Oh.
for having me. And I'm just thrilled to be able to have this conversation today.
Well, I'm so glad you were having it. You're just a rock star, Lysa, in every way. And I am just so encouraged in my faith and in my trials because of women like you who are pointing me to Jesus when life gets really hard and really messy. And, I know you know the stroke and the subsequent disability are a huge part of my just absolute tragedies in my adult life. But there are many more I have not shared with you, even though we are friends, for reasons of hurting people in my life that I love. But I've got some rock and drama outside of that, as so many of us do, whether it's family of origin things and friends and family that are very complicated. And I feel like you speak to that so beautifully and honestly and directly. And it inspires me that you're not just a one note, I had this thing happen and now I'm doing great. It's you've got a lot of ongoing hardships, and that speaks to my soul deeply. So just thank you.
You're so welcome. And, I was having a conversation the other day thinking about trying to get to a place of peace in my life. Now, obviously, we know since we have the Prince of Peace with us, we have his peace available all the time. But we have to choose to access that peace. We have to choose to call it forth. We have to choose to step into it and walk in it and bring it where we go, right?
Yeah.
And so all of that is true. And also, I was complaining to my daughter the other day about something. And I was like, why can't I just get all things to line up perfectly? And she said, well, Mom, in this stage of your life, you might have to redefine peace.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was such profound wisdom that
Mm.
came from my daughter. And that's so true. Sometimes when you're walking through really hard things or you have a challenging relationship, which let's be honest, I don't know a person alive that doesn't have
Right.
challenging relationships
Right.
and that don't have things that just pop up. Life is kind of like that game Whack-A-Mole. If you ever went to Chuck E.
Yeah.
Cheese,
Yeah.
it's like you take care of one thing and then 3 more pop up,
Oh,
right?
for sure. Yes.
And so that really helped me to think through. I may just have to change my definition of peace and what I'm really going for in this season of my life and choose to let Jesus's definition of peace invade my definition of peace and honor the sorrow and the the hurt in some of my circumstances. We don't want to live in denial. We can honor it. We can work on it. We can work through it.
Right.
But also in the midst of it, we can still rely on the Lord. And that's something that I'm challenging myself with right now too, Catherine.
That's so good. I'm big into redefining everything. I believe you can survive anything when you redefine everything, and that's what I've had to do. And for those people who thus far in life have not had um had to do that, you don't necessarily want to redefine everything, but once you do, you recognize this is so important to cope in this world. It's redefining everything in the upside down kingdom of God. So I love that. I'm overwhelmed in this season of life, but I am redefining the overwhelm in my life as the abundance in my life, because all these crazy overwhelming things are the things I've prayed for
That's right.
years. Like
That's
abundance is actually the right word. So I'm big into redefining as well, Lysa. Thank you for that. Lysa, so many of my listeners have known you through your books for many years, and others may not know your story well at all. I want to vouch for you. You have earned your credentials as a spiritual teacher to millions of people. In the spirit of understanding identity formation, walk us through the major points of formation in your story, if you will. What are the points of pain, disappointment, blessing, transformation, whatever, share as much as you want to or not, that have made you into the person you are today?
well, thank you. Big question, you
Yeah,
know.
I know.
Let me share a little story that I think will encapsulate some of my early years, and then we'll get into my adult story.
Sure.
Uh, I was going to therapy because I was walking through extreme heartbreak and tragedy in my previous marriage. And I was the girl who always said divorce is not going to be an option for me. I'm not even ever going to use the word divorce. And so when I found myself knee deep in a situation where an unwanted divorce was coming my direction, whether
Yeah,
I wanted it or not, and my choice at that point is I had to accept a very challenging and hard reality. So I was going to therapy, which helped tremendously. My therapist is an amazing, godly man, and he had me do this activity. It's called the trauma egg. I don't know if you've ever done this or not, but basically he had me take a piece of poster board, draw a big egg on it, divide the egg up into little square compartments. So there was lots of them. And then in each compartment, he said, I want you to I want you to draw a stick figure picture of any time you were abused, abandoned, rejected, hurt, or just something happened that made you feel less than. And so I started drawing from my earliest memories these little stick figures of significant things that happened all throughout my childhood, all into my early adult years. So through middle school, through high school, through college, and in my young adult life.
Yeah.
Then he had me stand in front of him and tell him the story of all of these squares. And what he was listening for was my shame script. In other words, some kind of pervasive script that went against my identity in Christ, that it had formed a belief about myself that I was carrying with me. And it wasn't just things like, it wasn't just a line that had been spoken over to me. So many of these things had become lies that I believed about myself, which then can become liabilities in all your future relationships. And so the thing that I kept repeating without realizing it, and that my counselor helped me identify as my shame script, is that I have felt like a terrible inconvenience at pretty significant points in my life. And so my process always is, it's better just to rely on yourself than take the risk of asking other people for help. Because if you risk asking other people for help, then you might be considered an extreme inconvenience. And so that when he pointed it out at first, I was like, well, that one's not so bad. But what I realized is it was causing me to hesitate in all of my relationships, even my relationship with the Lord. And I had become so determined to be self-reliant so that I didn't have to open up my heart to disappointment. And you and I were talking about reframing things, and that is such a good practice. And also, if taken to an extreme, like anything else taken to an extreme, it can become a detriment. And
Yeah.
so what I had started doing is just reframing everything in in to protect my heart, to make sure that I didn't need anyone. And it just became a situation where it was causing a lot of barriers. So that was a big thing that formed my identity for a long time. And as I worked on it, then I realized some other things about myself as well. As I continued to try to open up my heart and risk relationships, because all relationships require risk,
Right.
also discovered that I am a great codependent enabler.
Right.
And, I never probably would have known that. I always thought I was just a very, very compassionate person. So while I didn't want to have to rely on other people, I did like the feeling of knowing that people could rely on me.
Right.
And I'm a very compassionate person, but there's a fine line between compassion and enabling. And so because I was living with someone who was very he was in the addiction cycle, and there was a lot of substance abuse. And I knew that the consequences of his actions would have repercussions on to me and my children. I was always trying to catch the consequences and not let this person suffer the consequences that I feared would also be consequences for me and my kids. And
Yeah.
so being that rescuer, being that enabler, that also became part of my identity, because after so long, that starts to feel normal. And when something feels normal, you gravitate to it over and over and over. And so then it becomes part of your belief system, and then it becomes part of your identity. And so it took a lot of work as I got out of that very, very challenging relationship it had infidelity and substance abuse and all of that in it. It really did a number on my identity. And I had to take a step back and say, okay, I'm no longer going to be the woman who was married 30 years. I'm no longer going to be the woman who tied up my identity in that relationship and who tied up my identity in helping rescue everyone. I have to take the reins of my identity back and attach it to who I am. And who I am is a holy and dearly loved child of the Almighty God. And I had to start building my foundation new at that point.
That's so cool, Lisa. I love that explanation, and you've done an incredible job.
Thank
I
you.
love that. You're winning for sure at life.
Well, I'm still a work in progress, as we
Oh, aren't we all?
And I think,
Absolutely.
honestly, I think part of having our identity rooted in Christ is to recognize we're never going to cross the finish line. We're never going to tie our life up in a neat, nice bow while we're here on this side of eternity. The price of admission for living here on this side of eternity is pain.
Right.
If you think about it, in Genesis, when the consequences of sin were handed down, it clearly states that women would bring forth life, but in pain now. So the price of admission for living here on earth is pain. And it's a price that we will continue to pay until we get to the other side of eternity, where there will be no more pain, no more crying, no more tears, no more.
Absolutely. Amen. Lisa, I imagine you would say your life has been so far from normal at this point. Mine has too. Most of us have these unstated expectations of what our lives should look like or what we deserve in this life. What did you expect your life to look like, or who did you think you would be?
Well, I expected my life to be what I would have considered normal.
Right.
I expected that I was going to get a college education, and then meet and marry someone and have some kids, have the pretty little decorated house with the minivan parked out front, and raise my kids and, make a difference in the world by being kind to other people and raising good humans, and, and possibly writing. I always had the desire to write. Um, I just, I guess where things went askew for me in all of those expectations, um, is that I didn't factor in the reality that what makes life sweet is often the unexpected. But sometimes the unexpected comes with a really harsh reality of tragedy. And so, I think what formed me and what made me is the pain that I went through. What prepared me to make a difference in this world wasn't just writing tips about how to have a wonderful life and a few Bible verses. It was because I walked through the fire of everything turning my life upside down. And so, yeah, I never expected to be a divorced woman. I never expected to be an emotionally abused woman. And not that I hang my hat on that and build my identity around that, not at all. But I have to acknowledge that those things impacted me, they formed me, and they informed me about the many, many, many women that are walking in and out of churches every single day, and their home life behind closed doors is really awful. And, I think they feel very isolated, they feel very alone. And the thing that informed me about their hardship is that I walked through it myself. And the
Right.
thing that prepared me for my most effective ministry is the very thing that I kind of wish I would have never walked through,
Of course. I think many, many times that is exactly how it is. And it's a gift when we have eyes to see it that way.
Hmm.
It doesn't make it okay. No, no, no. But it gives it such purpose, all the pain.
Yeah. And it doesn't make it less painful,
Right. Oh, for sure.
Sometimes I think people assume if you're using your hardship for good, it becomes less painful. The reality is it's still painful,
Yeah.
but it adds an element of purpose to it that can help the hopelessness, because if we become hopeless, everything is meaningless.
Right. Yeah.
If it's just pain for pain's sake, there's no meaning in it, then it's harder to press through it.
Right. Yeah. You're exactly right. It doesn't make it less painful to have gone through the horrible things we've gone through. But when you have purpose, you have a reason to get out of bed tomorrow morning when your life's blown up. And I think that's the gift the Lord gives us. I love the truth of 2 Corinthians 1 that we can comfort others with the comfort we've received. And it's a cycle. I think He keeps comforting us. We keep getting out of bed, comforting others. And it's this beautiful cycle this side of heaven. So you're doing that. I've landed on the term, Lysa, emotional agility, for the ability to face life's deep challenges and circumstances with creativity and hope. I've always been able to pivot and improvise pretty well. And I think that has been a major reason why I've been able to thrive in a life I never, ever expected living. You have done your creative best with your life circumstances, even when so many of them have been terribly difficult and unexpected. So, Lysa, do you consider yourself a naturally emotionally agile person, or is this something you've had to work hard to develop over a lifetime?
I think that most people who know me would say that I'm a very flexible person,
Yeah.
and that I really am able to go with the flow and find joy in most things, even when things aren't, like, on a daily basis, aren't working out exactly like I thought they would. I can still find the good in them and the joy in them. But I think I've also had to work at being here's what I've really had to work at in being emotionally agile. I have had to really work at accepting circumstances that make no sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the part that can start to pull me under sometimes, is when I'm trying to make sense of something, trying to find like, why did it happen? Because I feel like if I knew why it happened, that I could prevent it from happening again.
Yep.
But my very wise therapist once told me, Lysa, when you try to make sense of things that make no sense, you'll lose all sense.
Yeah, seriously. I love that. Truly.
And so I have to really challenge my brain to get out of the thought spiral of trying to figure everything out. And the emotional agility challenge for me is to accept it and to move on from it. Sometimes move through it the very best that I can.
Yeah.
Um, and just to recognize that some things I'm never going to understand on this side of eternity. Some things will never make sense to me. And I think how it really plays out is in my relationship with God. I like to make assumptions of what I think a good God should do that makes sense according to my brain. And then when God doesn't follow what I assume a good God should do, and I try to hold him accountable to things, the way things I think that they should go, that's when I can start to slip in my faith in the Lord. And it's not that I don't believe in the Lord, it's that I feel hurt. Like, why can't you do this? Why can't you stop this? Because I know you can, and you're choosing not to. And so that's another piece of the emotional agility that I'm really working through. I guess you could also say spiritual agility.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I will say, having walked through extreme tragedy over the past 10 years, now that I'm a decade past the moment of impact and implosion, I can see now some of the things that I begged God to do. Had he done that, it would have caused greater tragedy in my life. And now I'm starting to see even more so that when I can't understand what God's doing facing forward, trying to look into the future, I have to challenge myself to look back and trace God's hand of faithfulness and his provision behind me, not trying to make sense of everything, but seeing that some things, it just takes time to see exactly what God is doing. But God is always doing something, and that something is always pointed in the direction of good. It's just that God's definition of good might be different than ours.
That's exactly right. And I'm big into correctly defining what good actually means and how can it be true that God withholds no good things, as it says in Psalm 84:11. And I've come to a place recognizing that that is because the good things of God are not physical things. The truly good things of God have nothing to do with our circumstances, but everything to do with our hearts. And it's been really light bulbs for me to recognize the goodness of God is never absent, even in really really hard situations and stories. So I completely agree. Lysa, I am a living testament to becoming better instead of bitter because of suffering. And I think you are too. I never want to dismiss trauma. Believe me, I've had plenty. But I do want to cast hopeful imagination for who we might become after the worst things that happen. Lysa, you have been through it. You have authority to speak here. I want to ask you, what do you have to say to the listener out there who is in the dead middle of the darkest days of their life? And is there hope that their soul has something to gain on the other side of their pain?
Yeah, such a good question. Well, first, I'll give a perspective answer. And this is something that the Lord is just now teaching me, and I pray it helps somebody. Sometimes when we get frustrated because it seems as if God didn't protect us from some things. You know, God didn't protect you from having a stroke. God didn't protect me from infidelity of my first husband. God didn't protect me from almost dying when, I had to have most of my colon removed. God didn't protect me from breast cancer.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when we just leave the sentence there, it can feel like in the future, it's hard to trust that God's going to protect us from things when we can look back and see, well, there are some things God didn't protect us from,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But what I'm learning is, yes, God did not protect me from some things, but he protected me for a lot of things. And so sometimes when God doesn't protect us from, we have to change that word and say, okay, but God is protecting me for something. God is protecting me for a future. God is protecting me for something that I can't even see. And, you know, Catherine, when I stand in churches and I share my testimony and I look out into the audience and I can handpick the women just by the expression on their faces and the tears down their cheeks. I know their story. I know that they're being abused at home. I know that they're probably suffering through the infidelity of their husband or the betrayal of someone that they thought they could really count on. I can see that they have been beaten down emotionally and some of them even spiritually. They've been rejected by people that should have helped them, but instead hurt them. And when I look out into the audience and I see these women who, if I hadn't gone through what I went through, they would continue in isolation for a very long time, because I just don't know that these women have heard someone stand in the pulpit and acknowledge from a Christian standpoint how hard this is, how hard it is to walk through an unwanted divorce, how hard it is to be betrayed on such deep levels. That's when I start to realize, yeah, God didn't protect me from a divorce, but he protected me for this moment in time where, whether it's one person or a million people, I'm able to give hope to people who otherwise would be extremely hopeless. And that's one of the greatest joys of my life. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember. I also want to say that in my new book, I Want to Trust You, But I Don't, I wrote about these things called rebellious acts of resilience. And I think this is something that you and I would have a ball.
Yeah. Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Love it so much. Wow.
And so, how rebellious acts of resilience really came about for me is I had to start listening in the middle of all the heartache and heartbreak and everything. I had to start listening for myself saying the words can't and don't. Now, sometimes I really can't, and sometimes I really don't, and that's okay. But a lot of times I was using those phrases because I was reducing my life down to the limitations of living hurt. And we don't want to reduce our life down to the limitations of being hurt. Just because we've been hurt doesn't mean we have to live hurt.
Right.
And so,
That's in the book too. I love
yes,
that
it is.
thought. You're exactly, yeah, I love it.
So a couple of my friends and I went to the beach. And one of the most important things for me at the beach is ice, because I want to fix a little cooler with my egg salad sandwich, my little chips, a bottle of very cold water, a Diet Coke. I know it's terrible. Don't write me letters. And some fruit to negate my other unhealthy choices.
Right.
And I a little cooler and I want to put ice in it, and I want to walk down to the beach, sit on the sand, read my book, and eat my snack. And so ice is an important part of this.
Yes.
Well, when we went on a retreat, the ice maker was broken. And I had a very inappropriate reaction to the situation. I started marching around the kitchen, shaking my fist, saying, if he would have never cheated on me, then he would be here. And if he was here, he would know how to fix the ice maker. And I can't fix the ice maker. And I'm just so angry. And so I just kept saying, I can't, I can't, I can't. And then I stopped myself and just said, but what if I could? And so I Googled instructions, couldn't figure it out. Written instructions are the death of me. And then I remembered the YouTube. So I YouTubed instructions of how to fix the ice maker. And as God is my witness, I fixed that ice maker. And then I started dancing around the kitchen because you know what, Catherine? It wasn't just about fixing the ice maker. It was about a moment where I overcame something that felt impossible. And it was a daily moment where I proved to myself I can get through something hard. And yeah, the ice maker was a little hard, but if I can overcome little hard, then that'll give me enough strength to overcome the big hard. And I just started every single day listening to the I can'ts and I don'ts and really stretching myself. Also on that trip, it was two friends, Jess and Ann, and Jess loves to play in the ocean. Ann and I do not. Our definition of going to the ocean is sitting on a chair reading a book. Okay.
Yes.
Well, when we walked down there, Jess carried 3 boogie boards, and I rolled my eyes thinking, oh, I don't do oceans. I'll never get in the ocean. And then she put boogie boards in front of me and Ann, and then went and jumped in the ocean, and she was playing. And so I said, oh, I don't do oceans. And when I heard the word don't come out of my mind, out of my mouth,
Yeah.
I thought, but what if I did? And before I could overthink it, I got the boogie board. I went and jumped in the waves. It was disastrous. I got flipped over. My bathing suit bottoms came down. It was a whole situation.
Yeah.
But I adjusted myself, fixed everything, and I stayed in that ocean. And for an hour, I laughed and I played and I felt real joy, and I didn't have any problems at all. And I just thought, look at what I would have missed out on. You see, sometimes when we're trying to get through something really hard that's really big and taking a really long time, we have to find micro wins. We have to find daily ways to rediscover who we are and what we actually can do. And we have to reinvigorate our heart with having fun and not thinking we have to sacrifice all of that until we finally get to the big aha moment where things seem fixed. Because if I would have waited until the big aha moment when things would have been all fixed, I'd still be waiting. And look at all that I would have missed out on.
Oh, wow. I'm overwhelmed. Trying not to cry. Something so beautiful about this thought of protection, not from, but for. Is that how you said it? And
Yes.
I want to be sure I understand that my listeners do. What you are saying is God did not protect you from the thing that happened, or not in the way you thought protection looks or should have looked, but in fact, He protected you for something. That is beautiful and very much overwhelmed me because I could not agree more. And what purpose in our pain that God is protecting us for something. And oh, wow. Thank you for those beautiful words. And could not agree more. I recently interviewed Bob Goff, and he wrote a new book that's coming out fairly soon called Catching Whimsy. And I'm so inspired to catch more whimsy in the second half of my life. And I hear you saying that loud and clear, that what we miss by not catching the whimsy of the moment, the micro win, is just so important and changes how we feel about our story. And that is significant. That moves from micro to whole enchilada when we have all these micro wins in our days. So, again, thank you for that brilliant word. Just a couple more questions, Lysa. I'm so curious, Lysa. What do you think about when you think about God?
Mm. When I think about God, I think of the one that never leaves me. And I think about how overwhelmed I am at his love and his forgiveness for me that he's extended to me. And I also think about how much God intimately cares about each one of us individually. You know, sometimes, Catherine, I have people come up to me and they say, Lysa, I'm so sorry for all that you've been through. It seems like the enemy really has a target on your back. And, you know, I understand the sentiment of what they're saying. I do.
Yes.
At the same time, I like to look at it a little differently. I like to think, how good of God 30 plus years ago to make my full-time job being in his word and teaching his word and standing on his word. I mean, I feel so blessed that that has been my full-time job. And so how good of God to allow me all these years to be in ministry so that when my life fell apart, I would have all that banked up in my heart and my soul.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes we give the enemy a little too much credit.
Yeah.
I don't want to say like I have a target on my back and look at the enemy coming after me because I'm in ministry, because then that could make me question God's goodness, you know? But I think it's a lot more to do with the fact that I'm in ministry because of God's goodness, because of his faithfulness, and how gracious he's been, even when my life has been really hard sometimes.
That's a beautiful word. I actually feel the very same way. I feel like anything, and I did not have some amazing platform and New York Times best-selling books before my tragedy or after, in case you were under the illusion that I was a New York Times best-selling author. I am not, although some people think I am. It's really cool. Anyway, I went to a tiny Baptist college in Birmingham, Alabama, and Christian girls camp and youth group, and had a lot of deposits of faith in my story throughout my life. And none of that was wasted, because in my tragedy, now I can stand on the deep truth I had tucked away in my heart. So I see goodness, goodness. How good is God that I am where I am, that I get to walk with him through the initial storm and now the subsequent fallout. That's just a gift.
That's so true. And you know, Catherine, I don't believe that time heals all wounds.
Of
I
course.
think it's what we plant in the course of that time that determines whether we heal or not.
Of
And
course.
so I think it's really crucial that we make a habit of looking back at what God has done. And for me, I think about those years that I begged God to let my story be one of reconciliation, because I thought that was the pathway to redemption.
Right.
And I was holding so tightly onto that, I couldn't even see that there was another way that God could write the story. But now the gift of time passing and me stepping into the life that I'm living right now, and it's not all tied up in a neat, nice bow, and it's not perfect, but it is good. And now I can really see that God, his pathway for redemption for me was not reconciliation in that relationship. It was a rescue for what I'm living now. And I'm just so grateful for that.
Wow, I love that so much. I feel very similarly. You know, I think early on after my stroke, I believed God would miraculously make my facial nerves work again and my face would not be paralyzed anymore. And I would jump out of my wheelchair one day and walk normally and wear high heels and run a marathon. Or I never really thought I'd run a marathon, but you get it. I thought my body would be healed. And now I am so, I mean, thankful seems an extreme word, but I have a legitimate amount of gratitude that there are these scars on my body and that my body doesn't work typically, because the ability to connect with someone with a paralyzed face instantly equals everything is not okay here. It's just this in my broken body is this instant like shoulders down response of, oh, okay, everything's not going really well for this girl. And I count that as this deep superpower I have, that it's apparent things are messed up in this story. And what a position to preach from. And it's yeah, it's a deep, weird gratitude. And that's profound.
You know, Catherine, I think you're one of the brightest examples of someone who lives the message of faith in such a tremendous way. I don't think you will really understand how much you inspire people until you get to eternity. Because the way that you have joy, the way that you and Jay have stayed together, the way that you operate as a family, the way that you love your kids, the way that you care about other people, the way that you host your Hope Heals camp, and what you do for so many, and even what you do for those of us who don't have the same physical challenges, but we have spiritual challenges and emotional challenges. And you're one of the greatest inspirations of our generation. And I just didn't want this moment to pass without saying it.
Oh, well, that really means something very special coming from you. And I'm honored that you're saying that. I can't fully agree because I'm insecure, but it's really cool to see what the Lord has done through my story. And
Okay, I'm going to teach you something really quickly. Ready?
Reg, please do.
Because I know it's awkward when someone is bragging on you and, and all.
Yes.
And so it's like, oh gosh, what do I say? Because, we're so intimately aware of our own faults and failures. So
Yes.
when thousands of people who are going to come up to you and tell you what an inspiration you are, I just want you to grab it from the air and bring it to your heart and rub it in. Just
Okay.
grab it from the air, bring it to your heart, and just rub it in.
Rub it in. Okay, I'm doing it. I'm grabbing it, bringing it in, rubbing it on my heart, and longing to believe it and have enough good therapy to understand that it's true and that I can receive it, and that is not being a sweet, humble Christian girl to instantly reject truths about me. And Lisa, while I'm at it, I want to talk for a second about your Therapy and Theology podcast because it is so amazing. Listeners, if you are not tuned in to the Therapy and Theology podcast, you should be. And Joel Mudamali, Dr. Joel Mudamali, who's actually a pastor at Hope Hills Camp and a phenomenal person, is one of the people on the podcast. Actually, Lisa's therapist, Dr. Jim, I forget his last name, is another one.
Yes, Jim Kress.
Jim Kress, and they are just magic. As good therapy is and does, it cuts deep. It gets to the core of what matters and how do we reconcile our faith in a therapeutic context that is healthy. And I'm all about it, Lisa. I have a wonderful therapist who I love and do a lot of therapy. And I'm a big fan of recognizing that healing is to be found in the combining of good theology and good therapy. So I love listening. It's a very important resource. It's inviting so many of us listeners into emotional and spiritual health, which could not be more important. You had a recent episode exploring our beliefs about God, which is something I've been thinking a lot about recently. A.W. Tozer said that what we think about God is the single most important thing about us. It's a major part of our identity. And what this series is all about, actually, about for identity formation. So, Lisa, for myself and our listeners, anybody listening, we probably hold some very deep, maybe even subconscious beliefs about God that are distorting who we are becoming. How do we go about believing the right things about God so that we can keep becoming the best versions of ourselves?
Wow, such a good question. I think the best way for me to answer that is to recognize that we're never going to be able to fully understand what God does and what God doesn't do. We're never going to be able to understand when God intervenes and then when he chooses not to intervene in the way that we perceive intervention should happen. And we've already talked about, sometimes we perceive how God should protect us and what that would really mean if he protected us. But, he is protecting us, but sometimes instead of from something, it's for something. And so in all of that, I think I'm trying to leave room for the mystery of God and recognize that the greatest act of faith for me is not completely understanding and making peace with what God is doing, because I'm never going to fully understand it. I may never be able to make sense of it. But the greatest act of faith is to say, God, I don't like this. I don't understand this. This makes no sense to me. And at the same time, I'm going to leave room for you to move. And I'm not going to make judgments about your faithfulness based on what I feel, what I think, and what I'm walking through today. I am going to declare that you are faithful, which should inform me to not make judgments and questions about what you're doing and what you're allowing. And leaving room for the mystery of God to me is leaving room to be delighted by God, because there is a lot of hurt. But also, there is so much joy if we just open our eyes to it. I'll give you an example. Last week, I was asked to speak in New York City, and I was so excited because this particular event, they had a special place after my speaking engagement where we could go and see the Christmas tree lighting at Rockefeller Center. And that is a bucket list item. Like, I would never brave the crowds and do that on my own.
Yeah, yeah.
It was the coolest thing. So we had that planned, and we bought some tickets for a show. We had that planned. But other than that, we just woke up in the morning and just said, Lord, surprise us and delight us. Like, we're going to look for your hand of activity, and we're going to recognize everything as a sweet little nod from you, or a sweet little gift from you. And so one of the things that happened is we were walking out of our hotel, and the doorman stopped us and said that he really liked the way we were dressed. And so we struck up a conversation with him. I thanked him, like, man, when you're in your 50s and people say they like the way you're dressed, that's just such a sweet little gift, you know?
Yeah, totally.
And so his name is Lenny, and we just got to talking to Lenny, and then he revealed to us that he's TikTok famous. And I disappointed him because I said, oh, Lenny, I'm not on TikTok, so, I wouldn't know that. And he said, oh, I'm on Instagram too. And he said, would you mind doing a dance with me? Would you and your husband mind doing a dance with me? And it was the funniest thing, Catherine. Right there in the front of our hotel, he teaches us this dance. He whips out his little camera and his stand, and he records us dancing, and it made his whole day. I mean, he was thriving. We were laughing, and I thought, isn't that just like God? Like, because we didn't have such a rushed agenda, we had time to talk to the doorman, and we had time to talk to the doorman. It was a pathway to such a sweet moment of joy.
Oh my
And
goodness. I really hope you put it into your social media that you do have, so he knows that you are like a really big deal and really cool for his TikTok account.
it's on my Instagram right now as a little collection video. If you play the
Oh,
most
good.
recent.
Oh, I'm definitely going to it right after this. I have to see this. I cannot wait. Oh my gosh.
And so I don't know. I think part of leaving room for the mystery of God, and leaving room for God to move, is just to sometimes, I know we can't do it every day, but sometimes just leave room for God to move. Leave room to interact with the people that come across your pathway, because you just never know what a gift of joy you could be to them, or they could be to you.
Amen. I love that, Lysa. Two more quick questions for you. Lysa, I have something that I like to call my soul's board of directors. This handful of people that I trust because I know that they love me is who I rely on for advice. And these are the people I want to speak into my life and my identity in a meaningful way. They remind me who I am and who I could be. So, who do you allow to speak into your identity, Lysa? What are the markers of a friend worthy of being on the board of directors?
I love this question. This was a piece of advice that Jim, my counselor, gave me early on when I was walking through losing pieces and parts of my life, like, walking through the death of my marriage. Even though I would say, like, oh no, my identity is not that I'm a married woman, but when something is such a big part of your life, your identity is wrapped up in some of those things.
Yeah, of
And
course. Yeah.
advice that he gave me was to get a board of directors to speak into me, but also to help me say no when I needed to say no to things. And because it's a lot easier to say, I have a board of people that advise me. And as much as my heart wants to do everything, they have said that this one's a no. And thank you for understanding, so that has really helped me too. But I have two friends that have walked every step of this journey who have had the same experience with me. So they also experienced the death of their marriages, and it was on the pretty much the same time frame as mine. One a little ahead of me, one a little behind me. But these are godly women who I know pray more words over me than they ever speak to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so these friendships were very, very important to me. Another set of friends that I have, they have not been through the same thing as me, but they have been so faithful to pray for me, to encourage me, to be there when I need them, even if it means dropping everything so I can come to their house and stay overnight because I'm terrified to stay alone. There was a whole season where that kept happening to me. But one of those friends is Shelly Giglio.
Oh,
And I
love
know
her.
that, Louie and Shelly are such special people to you. But Shelly has really walked every step of the journey with me, of all the heartbreak, all the hurt. And as much as she cried with me, she also celebrates with me, and she allows me space to make mistakes, but she's always reminding me to come back. She said some really challenging things to me and part of this journey, things I didn't want to hear, but because she had built up so much equity of love in the bank of my heart, then she was the kind of person that could speak both the good and the hard and the challenging and the encouraging into my life. And I think it's so wise to have some of these people. The third set of people, you've already mentioned them on this show, is Jim and Joel. Joel was my theologian in this season of life, where I could go and ask him deep questions as I wrestled through some really hard spiritual questions. And then certainly Jim Crest too. So when you talk about our therapy and theology recordings, this is the way it usually goes. Joel is going to bring the theology, Jim is going to bring the therapy, and I bring the problems. And so
Yeah.
it's like free counseling to me that everyone can benefit from.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I benefit from it. So, yes, for sure. And that's how it should be. Good therapy and good theology help us cope, make us into better versions of ourselves. Just one more question. I want to ask you, Lysa, something that I ask every guest on the podcast. And this podcast is called the Good Hard Story because for me and this special tribe of listeners, and really for every human being on earth, they're living a good, hard story. Life is not one note. Good and hard are not mutually exclusive, they coexist. So the question for you is, what is good in your story? What is hard in your story? And how do you live in the tension of both of those right now in your good, hard story?
Well, that's such a good question. Honestly, I think we should ponder this every single day of our life.
I agree. I agree. I'm trying.
So I think probably the biggest good hard for me is watching my family change. Um, it was really, really hard for a long time to
Mm.
have an empty seat at the table. And it was because that person chose to walk away. That person chose another life. And that was so heartbreaking and so hard to accept. And it was so glaring, especially at the holidays, because we are a family of great tradition. And so we had traditions that we had done decades. And, my kids are 25 to 35. So um, it was shocking to all of us processing what we went through, because when my husband left me, he also my ex-husband, when he left me, he also um, stopped having the same kind of relationship with the kids. And so there was a definite empty seat at the table, and it was really, really hard. But this year at Thanksgiving, when we went around and said what we were thankful for, one of my daughters looked at my now husband, Chaz, and she just said for the first time in many, many years, she feels like that we're a whole family again. And the good hard part of that is, wow, like just knowing we made it, we survived this, and we have new adventures that my family is taking. We have a new person at the table. That is all good and worthy to be celebrated. And we still have an empty seat too. And so that's still hard. But I think hearing one of my kids say that she finally feels like our family's coming back together whole again, was a good heart that I will treasure for a really long time.
Wow, that's incredible and so beautiful. I'm so, so glad Chaz is in your story, Lisa. Oh, my word. And it's just really beautiful. I definitely do not want to end the podcast without talking about your amazing new book. I want to trust you, but I don't. Hope you can see it, listeners. And let me just read the byline. Moving forward when you're or I don't have my reader on. Hold on, Lisa. So sorry. Or do you want to say it? You probably know
Yeah,
it.
I'll say it. It's
Okay.
moving forward when you're skeptical of others, afraid of what God will allow, and doubtful of your own discernments.
My goodness, so incredible and so beautiful. I don't know if you have a quick word to say about it. It came out on October 8th. Is that right? So it is in the world and available everywhere books are sold. And what deep, powerful, powerful encouragement.
Well,
Um,
thank you. Yeah, I'll just say trust is the oxygen of all human relationships. So when you starve a
yes.
relationship of trust, you starve it of vibrancy and potentially even starve it to death. And, as we go through this life, we are going to experience betrayals, disappointments. People are going to say that they'll do something and they won't do it. And then people will say that they'll be there forever and then they leave. And so we're all going to experience betrayal at some point. But just because betrayal is life altering, it doesn't have to be life ruining. And so that was my passion in writing. I want to trust you, but I don't. The title comes from where I started in the book. And then where I ended in the book is the story that I shared with you about rebellious acts of resilience and rediscovering a joyful life. And I took it really seriously about really taking someone through when their heart has been broken because of a family member, a spouse, or a child, or a parent, or whoever it is. There's real repair work that needs to happen so that our hurts from one relationship don't impact and to the detriment our other relationships.
Right, of course.
So yeah, I really, really have enjoyed this project. It has transformed my life, and I'm thankful that I'm able to get it into the hands of many other people.
Well, it is a gift to the world. And you already quoted earlier, but I wanted to be sure my listeners got it because it is such a beautiful word. You write, just because I have been hurt doesn't mean I have to live hurt. And that is beautiful. You also write that what is life altering does not have to be life ruining. And these are deep words for my soul to internalize, Lisa. So thank you for these just brilliant, brilliant ways of viewing things differently. It's transformative. It's clear you've had a lot of therapy, girl, and I'm a big fan. You're one of the voices I'm going to look to as someone who's really living so well in the tension of the good and the hard.
Well,
So
thank you so much, Catherine. And right back at you. Let's just grab it in the air, bring it to our heart, rub it in.
that is something I am longing to do. Thank you for this. I will not soon forget this conversation. Oh, pulling it together. You are a leader and you are a thought leader, a faith oriented thought leader that I am just deeply inspired by. So thank you, Lisa. You are at the helm, the leader of the pack of women sharing truth from a pulpit many times that I look to. Just I want to be like you when I grow up. So thank you for your heart. And I thank you for how you have responded to your trials. It's very meaningful to me.
Well, thank you, Catherine. And I say the same thing to you. And what a joy to be able to spend a few minutes just pondering life together.
Oh, it's been my joy. And it's been the joy of the GoodHard Story listeners, no doubt. So thank you so much, Lysa. God bless you.